Therese Wanda.
Joe excused. Janet Brown.
And excellent. Now, we obviously have full-time board members, so I would entertain a motion to have Therese sit as a full member for today's hearing. So, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, I'm going to be sitting as a full board member today, and we'll have a full board. Great. The case today is a continued hearing for Stacy Realty. This is for property at 145 South Road, map 4, lot 13-1. This involves two requested variances, one from Article 4, Section 4.4.1C, and a second from Article 3, Section 3.2.2C2. We do have full board today, so that's good. Apologies again that this was continued, but I'm glad to see what we have now. So, start out.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. For the record, my name is Attorney Bernard Campbell from the Office of Illinois Campbell Professional Association in Salem. I appear this evening on behalf of Mr. Daniel Stacy, who's the principal of this business. And we first want to begin by expressing our great thanks to the board for their willingness to gather tonight to deliberate on this important matter to my client, given the time constraints that were imposed on him as a result of action by the planning board. By getting to this point this evening, we are hopefully in compliance, or will be in compliance with some planning board conditions for the site plan approval, which we did receive conditionally from the planning board. Thank you again for your willingness to come out this evening and deliberate on this matter. So just to reiterate, we're here tonight asking for two specific variances. The first is to allow 800 square feet of enclosed inventory storage in 2 tractor trailers. This is the needed, or we believe needed, covered storage for certain of the products that Mr. Stacy's business would sell, particularly at the moment, hay, bales of hay, which obviously cannot be left out in the rain. I don't know if people got the rain that you got in Salem yesterday evening, but my suit was actually dry for years. I was caught in the downpour, and it was pretty heavy around 7 o'clock in Salem yesterday. We got 1.14 inches of rain in about an hour and a half. It's necessary to keep hay, straw, certain types of lawn polluting chemicals, ideally in storage to prevent spoilage and to protect the environment. And so Mr. Stacy has proposed using 2 tractor trailer storage units, which you see there on that plan in the dark color to the left at the end. And the purpose, as noted, is for storage of material that really should not be out in the rain. And so frankly, this was part of the site plan, and we viewed it essentially as ancillary to previous relief that this board has granted Mr. Stacy, but the planning board did not necessarily read it that way. They viewed it more as an expansion beyond what we had asked for in the last time that I was here a couple of years ago for Mr. Stacy. And rather than get into a long staffing poll with the planning board, we said, okay, we will come back to the Board of Adjustment, and hopefully they will acknowledge that this is really part and parcel of this type of business operation. And we're asking tonight for your blessing to say that that is acceptable, essentially ancillary to the lawn and garden business that Mr. Stacy has begun to establish on the site. The second variance is basically just a setback variance. And if you know where those 2 trailers are, they are within 3 feet or so of the existing property line. your section requires a setback of 25 feet from frontage of a lot. What I'm going to rely on, and I'll address the criteria in a minute, but if you look at that plan, you will see that the right of way that's in front of this business is considerably wider than other sections of South Road. And in fact, you can see the abutter to the left. You can see how that abutter's land actually pinches in and gets significantly closer to the right of way. And so if you were to measure from where those trailers sit to the point of that angle at the front, we're essentially 25 feet from where, if that line were actually the frontage line for the lot, we would probably be sitting back 25 feet. The fact is that there's an extraordinarily wide right of way in that location. We are a long way from the pavement. And therefore, as a result, we are within approximately 3 feet of the front property line, which happens to be the right of way line, and your ordinance requires 25-foot setback for that type of structure. But we believe that because of the nature of the right of way in that location, and I'm going to get into that when I talk about the criteria, but basically, the purpose of the setback, what is the purpose of the setback? Why does it exist? And our contention is that this variance would do no damage to that principle, mainly because we are so far back from the right of way to start with. So those are the two specific variances that we are asking for. One is essentially a use variance to allow the external coverage storage. If the board would like, I can have Mr. Stacy talk a little bit more about what those are. But rather than trying to construct fixed structures for coverage storage, for the moment, the most expeditious and probably the least intrusive way to do this would be to propose the trailer storage, which we're proposing tonight. And so I'm going to now turn and address the criteria that you need to consider, and I'll try and address both of the variances at the same time while I do so. So, as this board is well aware, there are 5 statutory criteria that must be satisfied by an applicant in order to merit the granting of a variance. The first one is that the variance would not be contrary to the public interest. And the way that has been interpreted by our whole system is to say that any variance of any kind is a slight variation from what the community has adopted. However, in order to violate this or to be considered contrary to public interest, it must be a variance to a significant degree. And the way that they have defined that is, 1, does the request represent a threat to the health, safety, or general welfare of the community? And the second way you measure that is whether or not it changes the character of the neighborhood. So addressing those two, first on the setback, again, we don't believe there's any threat to health, safety, or welfare. Setback variance from a right of way might be for public safety for travelers on the highway. If they don't strike an object that's close to the edge of the pavement or edge of the right of way, if a vehicle should stray off the right of way. Given the extraordinary width of the right of way in that area and the topography within that area, we don't think there's any likelihood that the trailers would be struck by any vehicle that might wander off Route 107. And so we do not believe that the setback variance creates a threat to health, safety, or welfare. Likewise, we don't believe that the proposed storage facility represents a significant impact to the character of the neighborhood. The neighborhood is still significantly rural. There are other businesses along this section of 107 that have equipment parked outside and other items displayed along 107. And so we don't think that the fact that there's going to be covered storage in the parking lot of this particular building creates a significant impact on the general character of this residential / rural neighborhood. And so we believe that with regard to the first criteria on public interest, we hope that you are convinced that we are not, that this variance is not contrary to the public interest. The second criteria for the variance is that the request does not violate the spirit and intent of the ordinance. Now, first of all, the state Supreme Court has said that this is actually generally judged by the state to standards. In other words, is there a threat to health, safety, and welfare, or does it create a change in the character of the neighborhood? But I also have an understanding that I do quite a bit of this variance work, both on applicants and for municipalities. I think we can look at it a little broader. But otherwise, why does the legislature have two different criteria? So I think the public interest is, look at what is it that the ordinance is trying to attack and how are we responding? Again, with respect to the setback, we believe we are not violating the spirit and intent of that setback requirement, given the size of the right of way in that area. As I said, I believe the spirit and intent of that setback is to provide space between any structures and the adjoining right of way. And in this case, because of the size, that land could easily be part of the site. It's not. But in any event, we don't believe that the setback variance violates the spirit and intent of your 25-foot setback, which, by the way, would push even the existing structures probably close to meeting that 25-foot setback. So, and that's also part of the entire MU here. And that is, we have a prior non-conforming uses at the site for a long time. In preparation for the original request to change the use for this site, I spent time looking at your town files. I noted that it's been a restaurant, it's been a gift store, antique type store. In this case, the fact that it's now moving towards something that's probably more in tune with the rural farm agricultural area that this occupies, we believe the spirit or intent of the ordinance is not violated because that would be an expected accoutrement. That if you look at other places which are similar in nature to this, they all have some level of closed storage where they actually have buildings constructed for the purpose of maintaining certain inventory in a dry environment. And this is our proposal for maintaining that inventory in a dry environment. The landscaping provides protection, a setback from residential settings, creates green space for personal recreation, which is not needed for this use. And so we feel that we are not violating the spirit and intent of the ordinance by either of our requests. The third criteria is that substantial justice will be done. And generally, what the Supreme Court has said on this criteria is that any harm to the applicant, which is not offset by a benefit to the municipality, is basically contrary to substantial justice. In other words, what does the community gain by denying? What principle do we validate by denying the request? And again, Mr. Stacy and his business feels that there's a need for covered storage based on the material that he's selling there. And there simply is nothing in the building itself. The building itself has all the things you would expect to find within the building. And the building is not big enough for any interior storage of any significant amount, whether it's, 30 bales of hay or whatever it happens to be. And the business really needs covered storage. And this is our proposal. And really, having granted the request to allow farm and garden centers to work, as I said, our original contention to the planning board was that it's essentially an auxiliary use permitted. They chose to go in a different direction, but it really is. So when you evaluate this criteria, what does the community gain by denying Mr. Stacy the right to have the covered storage in his parking lot? And what do we gain by saying that it has to be 25 feet from there? That would impinge on parking, it would impinge on outdoor storage and circulation areas. And we feel that it's appropriate to put the units there, given the large right of way beside it. The fourth criteria is that the request will not significantly impact the adjoining property values. And the requested variance that we're asking for in this case represents customary activities with farm and garden centers. The property obviously fronts on a fairly busy state highway. It is buffered in the rear and the westerly sides. Obviously, there isn't a butter across the street. But that butter has been across the street, either a retail shop, or maybe not, because they may be new there. But the abutting property across the street has been subject to, an antique store, and a restaurant with 100 seats. And so we feel that this particular use that we're asking for would not be significantly more impactful on that property and arguably less impactful on that property, given some of the restrictions that the planning board has put in place. The planning board, if you look at the planning board record, you see there are fairly significant restrictions on hours of operation. There are fairly significant restrictions on exterior lighting that exist now for the protection of all of the abutters. And so frankly, we think that this use will be less impactful on some of the values of the surrounding properties. And it fits more with the rural/agricultural feel that parts of 107 you travel from Seabrook all the way out to East Kingston that this area represents. So we do not believe there are significant impacts to the property value beyond things that pre-existed this site and the uses at this site. Finally, the third and fifth criteria is the hardship criteria. And it has essentially three parts to it. Beginning first by looking at whether or not the property itself is unique in its environment. And I think the prior non-conforming uses of the site, the existing structures that were on the site, the existing parking that was on the site, the existing curb cuts that were on the site, all of which represent features that make this property unique in its own way. You as a board, and not necessarily you as 5 members of the board, but the board itself has found this property to be unique as a result of its prior variance requests that has been granted for this site. And so I think we can hopefully agree that this is in fact a property unique in its environment due to the prior non-conforming uses and the ability of Mr. Stacy to utilize those pre-existing uses and roll them into what he proposes to operate and has been operating with planning board approval now for 4 weeks, 3 weeks, over 4 weeks. And business is, starting to roll a little bit. And obviously the brand new business hasn't been a lot of marketing yet. One of the reasons is we knew we still had a condition that the planning board had tagged on. So it's very difficult to throw the doors open and celebrate and to offer a lot to the community until we have these last items tied down. So, but I think it is unique in its environment. Having got past that, the hardship required then talks about how the applicable restrictions really aren't relevant to this particular site. And I think in many respects, most analysts who look at this take that component part and roll back to basically spirit of intent or public interest, because in fact, the question is, does the restriction, in this case, there are two. One is the frontage, setback rather. One is the setback, how does the setback really affect this site? How it would be enforced? The second is having to do with the use. And having already determined that this site is eligible for a farm and garden center, then wouldn't it make sense to have covered storage to keep lawn and garden items, whether it's hay, which there's some there now, whether it's sawdust, bales of sawdust or other kinds of sawdust products, whether it's chemicals in terms of lawn and garden chemicals that really should not be exposed to the weather, but in fact kept indoors and in some respects contained from any kind of environmental activity. If you have fertilizer, you prefer obviously not to have it out in the rain. If there's a bag that has a problem and it's sitting out on the outside pallet, now all of a sudden you have potentially phosphorus going into the environment through a torn and lawn food bag. By keeping some of those types of items in the trailers, you keep them dry and you avoid the possibility of environmental contamination by keeping them under cover. And so in the end, I think the fair and substantial relationship test is not applicable to either of the two variances we're requesting. And the final part of the hardship criteria is basically that the use is reasonable. And we believe that in this circumstance, this is a reasonable use. Again, given prior history for this site, given the prior variances that this board and the Board of Adjustment have given for this property, we think that these two modest requests basically allow us to fully operate the way we envision to operate. And we hope that you will agree. So that's my primary presentation. I would be very happy to go into questions. My client is here, prepared to answer your questions as well. And we look forward to your positive consideration of our requests.
Does the board have any questions for the applicant?
I do. Why tractor trailers?
Why tractor trailers? Well, I guess the alternative would be to build the structures. Frankly, I think the idea of the trailers is it's more flexible. At the end of the day, God forbid, if Mr. Stacy's business doesn't quite flourish the way he hopes it would, the trailers represent an easier way to clear the site back off as opposed to putting up. I mean, if you think of it in terms of, let's say, a lumber yard that has covered storage for lumber and so forth. The alternative would have to be to actually construct full buildings. And I would think at this stage, it might be more reasonable to assume that this type of proposal provides more flexibility. If Mr. Stacy eventually determines that that's not the ideal location, you might be able to go back to the planning board and ask to have those moved. The planning board has said, in effect, they're there as long as we have your blessing to put them there. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but I'm trying as best I can.
So are they under definition of structure?
Well, I had some of that conversation at the planning board. There's a court case out in Pelham years and years ago. They talked about some trailers that might be structures for the purpose of tax assessment. But as we know, one structure or one item might be considered a structure for one purpose and not for another purpose. They might be considered structures for the purpose of a tax assessment, but this town, in terms of its zoning ordinance or the building inspector, may not treat them as structures. They do have wheels. They do or do not have current registrations. They do not have permanent registrations, but they are unfit and able to move if there was a need to move them or relocate.
So they'll be on wheels What sort of landscaping will be in front of the truck trailers?
So, if you don't mind, I can answer that. Right now, the way that probably purchase this, where, the way that the landscape is actually a hill. So when you come down South Road, it's on the left-hand side, it actually comes down. So landscaping right now is all natural. We did have a couple of trees that were out in front there that were dead and, breaking into the roadway that I have cut down to about 6 feet high. But all the bushes and shrubs have been kept. In front of the trailers, there's actually a telephone pole with a guide wire that comes down. And then we also have the stone, or large rocks that were put in place, for more of a safety / security, reason. The thing is as of right now, the setback from the state right of way has been determined that they have no problem with these items because they're outside of their right of way. When I had to go in front of the Board of Selectmen, there used to be a horseshoe shaped driveway at this property for 2 different exits. On the right side of this picture, you can see where the state had me put in a berm to cut off that driveway and actually rebuild the swale down the side. When we did all that work for the state, they said that they accepted those there, because they're outside of their area. So they have no problem with it at this time. But when it comes to landscaping, as of right now, I don't want to do anything until I get approvals of what I can and can't do, because it just seems like when I do something, it's not, they don't like the way it looks, or vice versa. So
So is it currently vegetated?
right now it is currently vegetated. Like I said, you probably have bushes about 5-6 feet tall, to a certain point, probably up to the telephone pole. And then there's just grass there, and then it flows into the solid rocks. And then we have my gate that's in front.
So if you were to do something, what is it that you would like to do as far as vegetation? Leave the natural vegetation?
Oh, yes, so I've done multiple things that I was thinking about with this area. One, I could do kind of like a hedge, in a sense of planting different the hedges in the front there that would grow. The thing is, I've thought about doing a mural on the side of the, trailer as well, in a sense of basically painted on mural of cows or horses or stuff like that to kind of spruce it up, I guess. It's all, and everybody seems to do it. The question I have is I have to talk to the town if I'm allowed to do that, because then it comes, is it a mural? Is it a sign?
Nope.
And then the sign regulations, because right now the state took away my sign that was in the front of the building. There used to be a freestanding sign that they took out for visual. When they had, I went in and cleaned up all the dead trees, the dead bushes that were there, but then afterwards they asked me to cut out everything for visual on the property.
The other thing, if, for example, you suggested that we do some kind of plantings, that would actually be within the state right of way. And so, right now, we do not have that permission to do. I mean, it's one logical thing to be to plant arborvitae's, every 6 feet, along the trailers. But right now, we have no room to do that without the state's approval. You could ask us to try and get that state approval. But that's the fact, is that there's not a location for that. The other option, obviously, we could put a piece of fence. Now, even if we did a 6-foot stockade section that would basically screen the bottom of the trailers, it's not going to reach the top. And that the building inspector would consider that to be a structure of its own. If we had to build a wall that high, we have to engineer it and all that would go with it. If you in your wisdom felt that, a piece of, basically stockade fence, 6 feet tall, along the 40-foot section of the trailer, if you actually thought that would ameliorate the concern, you could do that as a condition. I'm not sure that, given the entire site, I'm not sure that really accomplishes much, as a practical matter. But we're open to, if that's the concern at the end of the day, whether or not we can do that.
So, I have a question, so the plant, display sales area that's adjacent to these tractor trailers. Is there a reason why you couldn't swap and put the tractor trailers in the plant display area and move the plant display area towards the front?
Well, the reason is, for my personal opinion, is it kept the forest away from the wetland area. And the thing that would be is if we have I'm gonna say moderate amount of, say, fertilizers or chemicals, in a sense of, like I said, fertilizers, lime, stuff like that. It's safer to be where the trailers are now than closer
Further away.
to
Yeah.
the wetland. Now, my opinion is when it comes to this business, you have a lot of products that are able to be outside with no issue. You have bagged rocks, bagged, bark mulch, soils, that stuff that can be outside, it breaks. It's not harmful in sense because it's natural products. Whereas the minimum amount of products that I have at this time for, specifically said, bad twine that people use in their gardens and their yards and stuff. We also have nitrogen mix that's also for gardening and farming, are stored inside that is dry. If a bag breaks open, you can sweep it up, clean it up. Once it gets wet, that's when you start having, it spreads out more. Now, for some reason, if it did get wet, say a bag is left outside on the deck or something, or there's a leak, it would be cleaned up quicker than if it was closer to the woods.
I think the other thing, Dan, if you look at the plan, and Dan didn't mention it, but I think you and I talked about it. If you think of it in terms of delivering products to get to those, if you were to put the trailers toward the back, in terms of a truck that would come to deliver to those, right now they're in a fairly good spot because that, let's say it's a 6-axle, not 6-axle, but a 6-wheel, 3-axle truck, a straight truck. Right now it could back up to those, or let's say it's a hay wagon, a load of hay. Right now it's fairly straight maneuver to get to those. If you put it back further, you're now looking at having to turn, and really you're not going to get room for a straight delivery. Now you're talking about having to turn the trailers 90 degrees in order to be able to get to the delivery. So we've talked about that as well. This makes, we think, the best sense from a pedestrian safety standpoint in terms of deliveries of materials that end up in those trailers. So that's also something that was considered.
At the same time, I'd like to just add to it, our thought process as well is that if Mrs. Johnson who comes in and wants product, she can back up to these trailers, it's on the pavement, it's solid, and she can get what she needs for her horses or her fertile or lawn, whatever she's doing or they're doing. And it's very simple. You're not going off the pavement over to a trailer on the side. Where the parking lot's been, as a pre-existing area, it's a little bit cleaner.
Any other questions from the board?
Thank you. What do you have for storage, indoor storage on the property right now?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Indoor storage on the property right now?
Well, so I think the building is 3,800 square feet. The thing will be here is that we do have a show on the floor. On the back, it used to be the, I would say, dining room area / bar. Because they used to have two different businesses. They'd have the dining room and then they actually have a bar in the back. So the way that this property used to be is on the right side, there's a parking lot where people would come in and out of a different entryway for the bar. And you'd have the restaurant. Now, that lower area at this time has product down there for horses and cows and chickens and goats and all kinds of stuff down there. For people to go down and walk around and look at, for gardening, to tools, to stuff with their dogs or so forth. Now, on the side here where the kitchen used to be, we do have a small area for grass seeds, fertilizers, and different products that are bagged on the shelves. But we also have an area for, say, rakes and shovels and barrels and stuff like that. Now, the thing is, when you order these products, you don't order 10 or 12 bags, you order a pallet. Pallet could be between 40 or could be up to 60 or 70 bags on a pallet. Now, the thing would be is when it comes to, say, these trailers for storage, it allows us to be able to be more efficient in the sense of other products that people in the area might want or need. Whereas some of this product, it just takes a lot of space. And the difference is instead of having stuff just packed on top of each other in the front yard, it's kind of stored away. Because if you go to other places, say like a Tractor Supply or Home Depot, they have pallets stacked on pallets of product out in the area, yard, parking lot, just stacked on top of each other. We want to have enough product that we have to serve the people, but not enough to be overbearing, I guess would be the word. Now, the thing is, it's like I said, the products that we have are all bagged. None of it is on the ground. We do not want to be having any chemical, or we've talked to the planning board about not having any chemicals, like say rock salt, for example, stored on the ground for loading into a truck. Take with management. Right now, we would have bags for people or homeowners for that sector.
The other thing I think I would point out again, has to do with access. If you look at the building, and like a good example would be the hay, all right? You're not really, there's no real location with regard to the existing structure where you can bring in any hay and carry it in, store it in the building, in any kind of real back. And there's not even a location to bring that kind of vehicle or delivery truck to back into, to get to any space within the building for certain types of products. Hay would be a good example. I don't know if any of you have ever come through Salem, but we have fairly famous garden on center. It's really not one center, but it's really an agricultural business, and that's the Dodge Grain. Seen it set up, but you know, they have really extensive buildings, warehouse within it. They do get hay deliveries from Canada. They do get hay deliveries from Fernando's farm in Derry, because I've seen their trucks come in. There's no place in the existing building where we could take a hay delivery. It would have to be out there somewhere in the outside. It's just not. You can't bring those bales of hay doors in the building, and there's no real place to store hay in the building.
So is this, other trailers to also expand your business? Expand your inventory into new products?
Well, I don't consider it expanding because we do.
Oh, I have that question.
So
And it's in a trade.
the difference I see is instead of having, say pallets on the ground with hay stacked on it with a tarp on it, which I could do tomorrow. I think that it's more of a presentable or more of an easier way to store the product, or more of a I don't know the word right now.
Appealing to
Appealing
the customer.
in that sense.
So the trailers are there already.
The trade, the planning board.
So ask permission to put them there?
Well, that's.
Yeah.
We're asking now because the planning board cannot determine or did not determine if they are considered structures or non-structures. So they basically passed the football off to you guys to determine this question.
And
Because
yeah, the planning board were aware, and as I highlighted strongly enough. We took a position going into the planning board hearing that was basically just part and parcel of what we were granted as a farming garden center. The planning board, or at least members of the planning board, felt that they couldn't determine whether or not what we were asking for storage really was part of the original request. And what they did was they said, you can keep the trailers there. And they gave us basically 2 months, 60 days to come back here, and hopefully get your blessing, to allow us to continue. So they are there now, they are being used now.
How long have they been there?
6 weeks, 7, they're being used for we were in for the planning board.
the planning board, but they've been, the trails have been there for probably over a year. Now, the thing is, from what I believe, if I move those trailers right now, I can still have them on site. But the issue is, it's the setback.
Well, you'd have to lock them up, because they said, we would have to, the planning board essentially said, if we can't get permission to use them for on-site storage, covered storage, then we would have to basically not store anything in them. So effectively lock them, leave them there as empty.
I think the other thing was if we moved them onto the parking lot, you'd be like that in there. Because the parking lot was originally, but they are off the parking lot as of right now.
So for clarification, the planning board indicated that you can have the trailers there and not using the storage.
We could use them as storage for the 60 days,
Okay,
the date of their approval.
yeah,
And essentially their approval then would lapse, or that part of their approval would lapse if we weren't able to get your blessing within that time frame, which is one of the reasons we pleaded to get you together tonight. Because the 60-day clock would probably run out before their next break.
I mean, I think, try to similar to how I saw it, I think it's about what you're saying, as I understood it, the trailers, planning board was surprised that the trailers were there. And ultimately said, okay, with our options being, we gotta move the trailers, we're not improving it, or we can use them and go to the zoning board and see if they'll allow them. It was effectively a way of trying to help the applicant, not make the applicant go through all the strain of moving them and then maybe moving them back through, or the strain of emptying them and locking them until approval springs. Does that sound accurate to the applicant?
I believe so.
But the other thing was that we couldn't come to terms as to how the regulations come to these trailers. That was the big issue, is structure is a permanent structure in the ground, connected to the ground. These are not. That was the issue that we kind of sidetracked.
I agree, there's much semantic parsing as to the meaning of the word structure. I will say, no one's mentioned it, so I'll say it here. There is a fairly large deck that is most certainly permanent, at least for now, attached. So, but regardless, I think we can all, well, it looks like in the application piece, we might not have to reach that question, so I guess we can see. I did have another question. It was mentioned, I wasn't gonna say anything about this, but it was mentioned that you've been operating for, the past 4 or 6 weeks, whatever it is. Does the property have a certificate of occupancy, right?
Right now, the planning board said that I can open up, and Gino said that right now he is fine with that determination, that he cannot do anything else until this meeting when it comes to other certificates of there was other things that we have going on in the sense of, building permits for, we changed out a window and some other things. So as of right now, this says it's fine, but I still have to finish my paperwork. And to finish the paperwork is here. So the planning board has said that they are okay with what's going on up to these trailers. They passed it back to this board. And right now, Gino is fine with what's going on, until the determination of this waiting as well. The other thing is we've also gotten, signed off from the fire department, with no issues from that. So as of right now, we're kind of in the limbo state, but I'm just trying to get paperwork finished so that everyone is happy.
Thank you. I guess my only other question actually is, there was, discussion at planning board as to whether or not this is technically an expansion of use. I see in a letter here, Mr. Stacy believes that the proposed storage could be considered a quote normal expansion and quote of the allowed non-conforming use. So do I understand that the applicant is accepting that this is, at least for purposes of this hearing, that this is in fact an expansion of the use granted, 2 years ago by the zoning?
That's a fair assumption based on our presence here in the application that we filed. The idea that, if in fact Mr. Stacy had approval for a lawn and garden center, whether or not the bringing on of storage trailers, would be considered an expansion under the tests that the state Supreme Court has set forth. Sort of in the Brust versus Hampton matter involving, the expansion of the gaming devices in a different space, whether it's just a more intensive use of a space that's been dedicated to that purpose. We have set that aside.
Thank you.
And we're hoping that you will recognize that this really is pretty standard for a farm and garden center and allow us to continue.
There are no questions from the board for the applicants this time. Thank you. Do you have anyone from the public who would like to speak with respect to her application? Either, all right, if you come up to the front and give your name and your address, please.
I've been doing 44 my fund. I mean, I've been a resident in this town for probably close to 30 years. Looking at the site plan, the only thing that I stand out is obviously the trailers are not aesthetically pleasing. I think they're small every town, but to me, it seems trailers are to keep chemicals from the wetlands. That's their purpose in the first place. So it seems like they could find another location. It's not so close to her. I mean, if that's their job is to keep chemicals from getting into the wetlands, then I don't see the issue of firing, maybe pushing them back with a different part of the property. It might be more aesthetically pleasing than right next to the I think that's probably one of the biggest things that I see. And I know it's been right there for a long time. It's probably been every year, but yeah, that's really not over here. And I wasn't sure, the plan would all that, it's through, but I don't try and put those next to the road I get, it's tight lot, but I just don't know if there's another area that's a possibility of this. So that's all. All right, thank you.
Any other residents who'd like to comment?
Sarah Hamilton, I live at 151 South Road. I am a member of the select board, but not speaking on behalf of them today, it's myself. And I just, at least when it comes to the distance from the road, it seems that if the applicant had better town ordinances or asked for permission prior to putting those on, that we wouldn't be here having a house for a variance. It's only a 3-foot difference. And I know there's been a lot of back and forth over the last couple of years, and meetings that I've attended, and this just seems to be a bit kind of what I've seen, and that's really frustrating as a townsperson to see the lack of respect for our ordinances that the town has voted on. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you.
Down under one who really. So I understand the need for, storage at a business like this. I've driven by several, recently with the express purpose of checking out their outdoor storage. I attended the zoning board adjustment meeting in 2023 that we had about this property. Where the applicant mentioned specifically Dodge's Agro. Dodge's Agro does in fact use tractor trailers to store on their property. The difference being they're very hard to see from the road. You have to keep looking for them. They're not obvious. The tractor trailers of this property hit me in the face every time I walk out my door. Literally. I cannot leave my house without looking at these 2 white boxes with banners hanging of them. It looks very temporary. And I think that in the criteria for changing the character of our neighborhood, I absolutely think that these tractor trailers change the character of the neighborhood. And it affects the way that people feel when they drive down our section of 107. And to follow up with that, they've mentioned several times keeping the chemicals safe from the wetlands. And 2 years ago, when we were here, we were assured that this board would be given a list of all chemicals that would be kept on property. And I'm wondering if that's happened.
Yes.
That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Do you have any other questions? Comments?
Hi, Richard Berger, One Hickory Lane. I'm gonna echo some of the things that my wife Katie said. So Mr. Stacy, Mr. Hammond, thanks for coming out here and explaining to us all these things. Because there's a lot more to it than what you can just pick up, just like, you know, the letters and things like that. So, and thanks to the board for giving us the opportunity to speak. My concerns are similar to some that have already been voiced. And it's that when we were here before, we shared concerns about the property in that general area transforming from something that was more rural, commercial, and beginning to feel more like industry. And we have this feeling that those trailers situated where they are, looking like they do, starts to make this area look more industrial than it is rural and agriculture. And some other folks have mentioned when you come over the hill from the west, you don't see the beautiful stone building that the business is housed in. You see those 2 trailers and a mural on the side of the trailers. There are other murals in town. A fence along the side of the trailers. There are other fences in town. None of that's going to stop you seeing the back and the tops of those trailers as you come over that hill. So I, like some others have said, I think that that does have an impact on the character of the neighborhood. And while we acknowledge that there are other light industrial type areas within Kensington, they're not in this little pocket of town. So we would like for there to be consideration that the trailers be approved for use for storage, but not exactly where they are right now. I understand the need for storage in the trailers. As Katie said, even Dodge's Agri does that, they've got these big buildings, sheds and all that other kind of stuff. That makes sense to me. I understand the reasons that they're located where they are. I do think that there are solutions to some of the other issues or that could be created by moving them to some other place. And I think that the idea of adding a row of trees or something in between them and the road, I think that's a great idea. I think
The fact that they're so close to the right of way that they would have to get permission from the state is a problem that they created for themselves, not something that. Well, by putting them that close, they created that problem for themselves. So in closing, our concern is for the character of the neighborhood and what people see when they first come over that hill. And we're not expecting to see that. And you can't drive by the area without seeing something that is beginning to look like industrial. Thank you for your time.
Didn't plan to speak, but my name is Ivy Casey, and I'm on 277 South Road here in town. I really have always thought that this would be a great place for a garden center. The only thought that I have in listening to everyone speak is, why not a greenhouse for storage? And that would maybe make the character meet the needs of the neighborhood and the town. The greenhouse is indicative of a garden center, and you can certainly store it, and also, maybe begin and grow your own plants to sell and so forth, like other garden centers do. So it's just another option in the discussion.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public?
My opinion.
All right, do you have anyone on the board who'd like to ask any questions from the speakers from the public, please go back to the applicant. Seeing none, we'll go back to the applicant. Has anything that they would like to respond to beforehand?
Well, one thing I wanted to say is everybody's thought of how an area should be looking like in a sense of rural is different. If you go up north, you'll see people with a lot of tractors and trailers and trucks and stuff that have been broken down over generations of people being out there. The thing is, about half a mile up the road from my property, there's a gentleman that has a 7 by 40 foot storage unit. It's a steel box right in his front yard on South Road. He uses that to store, because I've done some work for him. I think he stores stuff in there, but it's right in his front yard. That's one. Two, with this being more of a rural area, there's certain things that other people would not find, say, pleasantly to look at, like long grass in the front yard. Some people have grass that are over 4 feet tall. Some people have nice manicured lawns. Some towns don't allow it. This town, not a problem. This is a rural area. Want to let your grass grow up tall? Not a big deal. Yeah, if you drive up the road from here, you're gonna start getting people with horses and cows and tractors right in the front. And then you go right into John Deere that has equipment right off. Now, I know they've been here for a long time, and it's up the road, but it's in the general area.
May I have 2 minutes to speak to my client?
Does the board have problem taking 2 minute recess? What is important?
It's okay, if you're gonna add anything different than we haven't heard.
Well,
If it is, then I object. If it is, then, well, okay.
let me just say, I know there was a suggestion of planting some trees, but then I also heard that the real issue is the view from over the curve coming down, headed eastbound. And the trees, if they were planted, probably wouldn't really solve that problem. I was going to ask Mr. Stacy if in fact there was even 2 or 3 additional feet that we could move the trailers even 2 or 3 feet to the east or northeast, and then give us room on our side to plant some arborvitaes. The issue is we still want to, if possible, be able to get access to them by a straight truck that would back directly to where they are. There might be room to get 2 or 3 feet and then plant something in that area right up against the right of way. And if you were to say that that was the condition that we had satisfied in order to get your blessing, I think we could make it work. And you'd have to just jock it in 2 or 3 feet and then plant something on the inside in front of the trailers. If that really was something the board felt they wanted us to do.
Wouldn't that also bring around your multi barriers for being within 25 feet of the road?
No, and I'm saying if we moved it 3 feet, we'd now be 6 instead of 3.
Oh, I thought you were.
No,
6, okay, all right.
I'm just saying, yeah, if we would have moved them 3 feet further away to give us room to plant a row of trees in front of it. But again, that would still allow us to have them in the general vicinity to allow a street truck to come in and do the drop delivery as opposed to something else. I mean, at the end of the day, yeah, he can kick me if he wants to. I think in the hierarchy of things that we would like, obviously first is to be able to have the storage facility available. If this board, in its wisdom, felt that they needed to go somewhere else. I'm not sure where that is, but obviously I think it is more inconvenient for the customers and inconvenient for Mr. Stacy. I tried to just provide one option, which would be to kick them back 2 or 3 more feet and give us room to put 4 or 5 or 6 arborvitaes right in front of them. Eventually they might grow up to be 8 or 10 or 12 feet tall, and they might provide some screening. I don't know that that's gonna cover the view from the top, but it would cover the street view.
One last thing was, this property predates this property's been here for so long that the right of way from the state came later. And the actual building, physical building that's there, is actually about 6 feet off the line. So the thing is when I put the trailers in place, I understand that, you know, if you're not supposed to be within a certain amount, you should move it. But the problem is, the whole property is kind of encroaching on that. That's part of why we got relief for home. So, I just want to know that.
Or any other questions we have? Right.
For Mr. Conklin, if that,
So
that should provide it to.
it consists of everything that I have. So if I have bee spray in the property,
Is what I'm asking.
I don't know, 400 and something chemicals. I have 2 binders that I gave to the town. Because when it comes to, say, propane, they have a chemical list with their chemical folders or pages. And you have to print them all out to provide them to the town. So there was a very long list. I think there were 6 chapters. Now, the thing is, when it comes to chemicals, everything from cleaning agents to fertilizers are considered chemicals. So the thing would be this is if I have 409, I have to put in there sunscreen has to be in there. 2 lime, the lime that I talked about, or the fertilizers that I talked about individually are all listed. And then
To house those chemicals, when it came to the zoning board and then provided a list, where were you planning to store those?
sir,
Many are in the building, because they're on shelves.
yeah,
So the line around the fix in the building?
No, not mine, but I mean the cleaning agents, the
How
409s.
some chemicals, which.
Well, 409s on that list.
yeah, I understand that you're more concerned or going towards for the bad fertilizers and that type of product. But there's a lot of products that have chemicals in it that are part of, the agricultural, business. So the thing is, yes, we were planning on putting some products in the building, but it's a growing kind of idea. Like you said earlier, at the time, the definition of structure or non-structure, I didn't think it was an issue having them there at all. And then I was determined later that there was.
Are these the ones that you're talking about or would impact conservation? What are the chemicals that I'm asking you about? Do you want to put those in the trailers?
Correct.
That's why you want.
Yeah, because they're larger bags, they're, 25 pounds or 50-pound bags that come on a pallet, and the thing is, obviously, it's nice to have them in the building, but at the same time, you don't want too much of that product inside the closed space. These trailers, I'm gonna open up the doors, they air out every day, they're used, it's flowing inside the building. There's a certain amount, you only have so much in. So that's a concern. Like I said, technically I could put them outside and put them on a pallet, cover with tarp, and would still be in my right, but I'm trying to do something with the best of to my ability.
So I'm clear on that answer. So first, when you came to the board, I wasn't in this board just about time. When you came to the board 2+ years ago, there were no trailers on the plans, they weren't contemplated outside, that's right?
Correct.
All right. At that time, we were planning on having the same types of chemicals that we on property, that's right? Correct. All right, so then, at that time, the plan was initially to keep those chemicals either inside or on parts, on pallets, or something else. And since that time, 2+ years ago, since you know what, maybe it's a better idea instead of doing that, to bring in these trailers to keep them there. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay.
Again, I'm struggling personally. with the acceptance of the nine and something that's moving. So you did say that it's on wheels, it can be moved.
Yeah,
So,
that was part of
point
the,
of clarification, struggling with granting the variance to something that's mobile.
Yeah, so
One way or another, definitely.
this is literally my prediction.
So there's, I guess, two aspects. So as far as I see it, and based on the nice long discussion we had at planning board, how I come to do this. One, given the nature of what these are, which is to say, all of them are mobile, they're intended to be kept in place. There is a jack that's effectively attached to them and they're not registered, whatever else. Given all these things, perhaps they are not back. Structure, notwithstanding that you could, if you hook them up and grease up the wheels, down there, should be doing something else. So that's one. Two, kind of bypassing the entirety of that concern is the idea that when the board said you can operate the ag use here. It was with the idea that the thing operating there is a 3,800 square foot building that already exists without any additional storage, et cetera, on the property beyond what's outside. So without any sort of problem, this could certainly be a question I came up with the planning board was, well, the thing that was granted was this business that did not have to, an 800-foot indoor trailer storage attached to the business. And what is now being asked for is business plus larger version of that business, which includes 16 square feet. So the first question we will come up with is granting, not necessarily because it's a structure, but because it adds effectively 800 more square feet of use, indoor use to the property, deciding whether or not that is whether or not to allow the expansion of the use from 3,800 plus outdoor to 3,800 plus storage plus.
Not the 800.
Yes.
Let's confirm that you're talking about in-house storage, is that the term you use, or enclosed storage?
Enclosed, yeah.
Enclosed storage, because before, it was determined that they approved for me to store stuff on the property. So it was intended at the time that if pallets of product were outside, that is part of the business. So this is more for enclosed storage.
But I will say, I mean, understanding, I don't put this on you, given that the structure thing, I raise the point that has been debated and could rightfully be off go either way.
Yeah.
But I will say the original minutes from 2 years ago, we have the line, D. Stacy explained that he's looking to keep the existing structure and make it more usable and not looking to expand beyond that, what is there. He will be cleaning up the building. After that, you will not be changing the physical structure to the building. Again, understanding the structure thing, I'm not putting bad intent on you, but
Yeah,
to me, at least, this does say you know, this is a different size than what's we're aiming to see. Do you have any questions to the applicants before closing public comments? I'm going to close public comment, of course, we're going to still have point of questions, and answer, and so ask them. This begins deliberation. I'll say to start out. We have two variances that we discussed. First one that we need to determine is a variance allowing the expansion of a non-conforming use. This is under the Article 4, Section 4.4.1C. What we will have to determine here is whether or not the applicant has demonstrated each of the 5 requirements for a variance, which we have been helpfully walked through by the applicant's counsel. Those items in very brief are that it's not contrary to public interest, that the spirit of the ordinance is observed, substantial justice is done, values of surrounding properties will not diminish, and little enforcement of the ordinance has resulted in unnecessary hardship. Do you have any discussion from the board with respect to any or all of these categories of the application?
We've had testimony from butters that, does impact character of the neighborhood. You know, I think by being up my door and selling tractor trailers. It wouldn't be too happy.
As a point of clarification for the restrictions under 322. Number 2 was that. Oh, sorry, number 3, trailer parks and multi-car parks are specifically prohibited in this district. Does that mean trailers as well as, I mean, what constitutes?
I think it's like a whole truck.
But, you know, but it's separated. So I was just curious, and the trailer park and. So I'm wondering if the trailer is even allowed.
And it does not look like our regulations define either of those.
Right.
Which leaves me thinking, I suppose that is up to you, or us, I should say, if you believe that's the case.
If it wasn't separated, it would be started, and I would have thought it would be as a mobile park. Because mobile parks are trailers, but it's a trailer park, so. Just questioning. And I didn't know that it came up with for any question.
It has not come up, and, the planning board was forced this even closer. Any other thoughts from the board? Yeah, very quickly go through the, at least what I've heard is some of the, testimony summarizing it this way, you know, like kind of what's been said, and if anyone here just had anything they've written down that you think I'm missing, please let me know. So, in brief, we've heard that the trailers are well set back in the road, at least they're well set back, not outside 25 feet, but from where the actual road begins, they are. That other businesses nearby have some equipment out front, and I guess the character of the neighborhood. That it has in the past been a restaurant, other businesses. This is potentially more rural at least than some of those other businesses. That other locations on the property may be feasible or not as beneficial at the very least because they have parking in the aspects of the property. We've also heard on that front that this location allows for access to the pavements for drop offs and pickups of different various things stored inside the trailers. And that it is farther from the wetlands, which is potentially impossible in case of a leak. We've heard that it has a unique property given that it has existing buildings and parking, which for this area at least it's relatively unique that they already exist. And we've heard that the trailers are less permanent than an actual building being put there. If ever needs to move or if ever wants to move them. from residents. We've heard that the trailers are not particularly pleasing aesthetically, especially given that they're right out front, they're very obvious and this impacts the neighborhood. We've heard that the location is rather close to the road, although again, 23-ish feet or whatever it's been, it is still on the roadside of the property. We've heard that it's difficult, though maybe not impossible, to shield this to trees, depending on if it's moved back a little bit further. And we've heard residents ask about whether other options, notwithstanding that they may be permanent structures, like greenhouses, may actually be more aesthetically pleasing and accomplish the goal. We also heard that the building already has 38 square feet of storage, and I believe that's all of those I've read down.
Thank you. When you purchased the property, I'm assuming the two trailers were not there.
These two trailers were not there when I purchased the property.
Okay, so the day you did the PNS, the two trailers were not there. That's correct. So then you purchased the property sometime after that, then you put the two trailers in.
Correct.
Okay, that's no question. Thank you.
Any other discussion from the board before moving to the specific items that we're going to consider about? All right, seeing none, I'm going to suggest that we need to start by considering variance requirement number one, which is that the applicant has or has not demonstrated that the variance is not contrary to the public interest. For testimony of public interest, then we're going to have thoughts on whether or not this is contrary to the public interest.
It's contrary to public interest, and that it is, we've heard testimony from butters that the trailers are a visual and negative visual impact. And it is a further expansion of what was approved 2.5 years ago.
Do we have any other discussion on this? Hearing none, I would suggest a motion that the applicant has or has not demonstrated that the variance is not contrary to the public interest.
Okay, motion,
And what will that have to be?
has not demonstrated.
So we have a motion that the applicant has not demonstrated that the variance is not contrary to the public interest. Is there a second on that? All right. All in favor, please say aye.
I,
Aye. All opposed to that motion, please say aye.
Aye.
All right. So that is four has not demonstrated and one for one against. The applicant does need to fulfill all of the variance requirements, so this will have the impact of denying the variance. However, I am going to suggest that we run through each of these, notwithstanding the obstacle here, just so that we make sure that we consider each of them and have a record of that.
Mr. Chairman, we both, are you taking separate votes on each of the variances or the collective application?
This is on the initial variance, first variance, for an expansion of use. We're taking votes on each of the specific 5 variance criteria. The second variance we consider applicants.
Okay.
That answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Okay. All right, do you have any discussion as to the second variance criteria that the spirit of the ordinance is or is not observed by granting the variance? Being on, I would entertain a motion that the applicant has or has not demonstrated that the spirit of the ordinance is observed by granting the variance.
Saying has not demonstrated, again, it's an expansion of what was granted 2.5 years ago. It's a tough lot, and, I think what they're proposing is further impacting
All right, is there a second to that?
Second.
All in favor of the motion that the applicant has not demonstrated that the spirit of the ordinance is observed by granting variance? Aye.
Aye.
Five. Right. The third factor is that substantial justice is done by granting variance. Do you have any discussion on this factor? This rate motion.
And the state has not demonstrated that substantial justice is done.
All right. Yeah, sounds like a good motion. Okay, we have a motion that the applicant has not demonstrated that substantial justice is done by granting variance, and we have a second. All in favor of that motion?
Aye.
Fine. Next criteria, the applicant has or has not demonstrated that the values of surrounding properties are not diminished by granting variance. I will say we have heard little tangible testimony as to values of surrounding properties. We haven't heard it one way or the other, in my opinion, at least. That said, my common sense at least says that a neighbor who now is living next to a couple of trailers, one might be able to deduce that their property based on value somewhere. So, but we have not specifically heard any evidence, I think, in favor of this being neutral as far as surrounding property values. That said, during discussions.
Say this one.
We have a motion for has not demonstrated. Do you have a second? We have a second here. All in favor for the applicant has not demonstrated that the values of surrounding properties are not diminished by granting variance. Aye. Five. All right, final fact review, requirements. That the applicant has or has not demonstrated that literal enforcement of the ordinance will result in unnecessary hardship. We had a discussion on whether or not this would result in unnecessary hardship.
Business was set up with the theory that they would not have this expansion on the property. So I can't see how it's been demonstrated it's going to impact in any way now. So, and not in a way that it's unnecessary hardship to that extent.
And then discussion or the motion one way or the other.
Make the motion that it has not demonstrated that literal enforcement of the ordinance result in unnecessary hardship.
All right, is there a second? Second, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, and throughout this first variance, let's go to the second one. Well, throughout this first variance, do I have a motion? With motion being ordered that the applicant has not demonstrated that a variance should be granted for this Article 4, Section 441. We have a motion for that. We have a motion, we have a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. So this variance is, this first variance, it's denied. We do have a second variance. Which may or may not. Well, let me ask the applicant. The applicant believes the second variance is still. The first variance moved on, the applicant also looking for a ruling with respect to the second variance still.
Let's go through the process, Mr. Chairman.
Sure. All right, so the second variance looks for relief from the ordinance Article 3, Section 3.2.2C2. This particular variance is seeking relief from the requirement that there should be a minimum depth of 25 feet between the nearest right of way and any structure. We discussed a little bit ago some of the all testimony that we've heard, but some of it includes that this is in fact, fairly far away from the road, notwithstanding that it's fairly close to the right of way. That's what we heard. Do we have any discussion on, this setting variance?
But we've also heard from the neighbors that they're in our store in the neighborhood. They're in.
Yes, all right.
And there isn't gonna be moved them if they're actually allowed there to be put in a parking lot or put somewhere else where they could be seen.
Which is said it could be potentially placed elsewhere on this property, notwithstanding that may not service, all of the desires of the applicant.
Exactly.
Any other discussion, or we want to move on to, otherwise we'll move on to the first factor. Seeing none, first factor is whether or not the applicant has demonstrated that the variance is not contrary to public interest. Any discussion or motion with respect to this first?
I make a motion that the applicant has not demonstrated that the variance is not contrary to public interest.
Is there a second? All in favor?
I,
Spotted. Second requirement that the applicant has or has not demonstrated that the spirit of the ordinance is observed by granting the variance. We have any discussion or motion with respect to this, or second requirement.
have a discussion, but do you want a motion?
I'm happy to answer any.
The applicant has not demonstrated the spirit of the ordinance is, has not demonstrated the spirit of the ordinance is observed by granting the variance.
Is there a second? Second, all in favor? Five. Third, the applicant has or has not demonstrated that substantial justice is done by granting the variance. We have discussion for the motion with respect to this.
The applicant has not demonstrated that substantial justice is done by granting the variance.
We have a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, that's five. Fourth, the applicant has or has not demonstrated that the values of surrounding properties are not diminished by granting the variance. Do we have any discussion or motion with respect to this requirement?
It's sort of like the other.
We don't want to think that they're
All right. Approve of, impact to neighbors to the way. Any other discussion or motion?
Make motion that the applicant has not demonstrated that the values of the surrounding properties are not diminished by granting the variance.
All right, is there a second? You have a second? All in favor? Five. Finally, if the applicant has or has not demonstrated that literal enforcement of the ordinance would result in unnecessary hardship. On this one, I'll say we also heard some evidence that enforcing this, means that they will be forced to place the storage of certain chemicals closer to wetlands, which I think we can agree, at least, in that one respect, that having the chemicals stored farther from wetland areas is probably a benefit, and having them stored closer to wetlands is a hardship to probably all of us. On the other hand, we have heard that these could potentially go elsewhere, notwithstanding that they might be a little closer to wetland areas or wherever else. We've also heard that the current location is optimal for loading, turnarounds, trucks not hitting pedestrians, et cetera. We have any other discussion as to unnecessary hardship?
I would just add that these chemicals could also be put on the outside of the building, where accessing it by trucks may not be convenient, however, they could be taken by trucks and then moved into the back of the, away from the wetlands and in the back of the building, whether they're covered and on pallets or if they don't fit in the building.
Any discussion on this element for the design requirements? I would entertain a motion that the applicant has or has not demonstrated, this requirement.
Make that motion.
Which way?
That the applicant has not demonstrated that literal enforcement of the ordinance will result in unnecessary action.
All right, all in favor, or sorry, second. We have a second, all in favor of that motion? All right. Finally, I would entertain a motion that the applicant has not demonstrated the requirements to grant a variance.
The motion, I'd make the motion that the applicant has not.
We have a motion that the applicant has not demonstrated the requirements for variance. Do we have a second? We have a second, all in favor? Aye. Five.
I,
All right. All right, variance number 2 is also denied. Thank you to the applicant and for coming both days.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're well aware of our appeal rights.
Yep.
Mary and Susan. Maybe we'll end up taking the trailers out and putting stuff on the tarps instead. I would have done it. Thanks. That's not a structure any longer. I would have under retirement.
Thank you. And thank you to the public, also our public you, whoever received the last one. I've come out twice. Thank you guys for sticking with it and all that. Thank you. It's supposed to, that's supposed to. All right, so we voted, this hearing is done. Board have any additional new business or
Just anything else?
yes, I'm going to suggest we should go to the next item with 7. Yeah, sorry. If there's anything else, anyone should know. Give a second. All right, anyone in favor? Oh my God.
I think that is the motion for the sitting here. There's nobody who can special score. Yeah, yeah.
Well, enjoy the rest of the summer.
You too, yeah.